What's up people, my name is Anton and welcome to September. Today I'm going to be taking you through how you can go out making some gradients inside of Photoshop. Surprisingly difficult, harder than you'd think picking out palettes and whatnot. This may well be part of a longer series. I might start using these for making some more product renders and sort of applying and UVing these and seeing their sort of like use case, because although looking cool in wallpapers, I feel like they're quite versatile in what they can make. And ultimately it should also give you a few techniques that you can use inside Photoshop, particularly in the filter section, which work quite well in creating some nice colourful looks. So if we just flick through these are a few that I've made, which I might make available at some point. And as you can see, quite nice, faded well together, and should give you a pretty good insight into working with colour in Photoshop. So we can pretty much get started. I'm going to head and open a new project. We're going to set this to 5,000 by 3,000, just so we're working in really high quality. Gives us a little more control, just like this. And something we want to make sure from the dot is down here, you want to take a look at where it says 72 ppi, and we want to head to image, canvas size, I believe, or rather, you want to head to your mode. Where would it be? I believe it might be image size, resolution 72. Make this about 300. You really want to make sure you're getting that pixel density, because it's going to make your gradients much higher quality. And then we can zoom out, we can start getting to work, and you can see it's up the resolution, but generally this is kind of what we want. So as an initial first step, what you really want to do is start thinking about your color palettes. So if we head here and start, I believe there was a site which I found, color palettes. I know I spelled palettes wrong, but it's okay. You can find a lot of sites like this which are pretty useful in terms of just like picking out your colour. It saves you doing it, because it's quite difficult, colour science and whatnot, picking out stuff like this inside of Photoshop. So we can find something from the get like this which looks nice. Look for variation in colours is something I'd say, because you can edit quite a lot in Photoshop, but you don't want them to look boring, right? So what we can do is, this looks quite nice. I quite like the look of this. Sort of the white and the orange go quite well together. Some of these are quite pastel-y, but as use case I think this would work. So if we just copy this, or rather we can just download the image and then drag this straight into Photoshop like this. We have our palette there in the corner that we can work from. And straight away what I would do is I would you have a few methods. So first step is you want to get on a layer, the colors just down. You want to get them down. So you can either go about doing that. It's important to keep this visible so that you can use the eyedropper cue to just pick the colors that you want. We can duck this and we can just start selecting areas. So we can either do this and then click fill, right click fill, color. Just make sure we're clicking color there and eyedrop that. And that's going to have an orange. We can make a layer just beneath it real quick and just highlight a little extra of the area. And we can fill this with the next color along, so it'll be this sort of like beige. Rather, we can select more of the color, and we can, in fact, I'd almost suggest making this beige a little larger, because that really is like the focus, almost like the background color is the way I'm thinking about this. Almost like a Headspacey type palette, if you guys know about Headspace. And then we can head over here to something like that. You can pick the colour one more time and then make the lighter blue. And lastly, on our final layer, select this area here and just make sure, selecting that dark blue there, and we have our palette down. So at this point what we can do is we can just group these, Control G, Control J and then Control E. That is my most used shortcut sequence in Photoshop without a doubt. It duplicates the group, or firstly groups it, duplicates it and then merges it. And now we can start playing with this. So what we can do is we can really, firstly, let's just apply a nice blur. So we can head to Gaussian blur here, and we can just, it's not going to repeat the edge pixels, but that's okay for now. We can blur this as much as we possibly can. So we're getting a nice little bit there, but we don't want too much. We can really go with something maybe like this. Also bear in mind when you're working with gradients like this in Photoshop, it's important to know that what you see right now may well look nothing like the end product at all. There is so much color changing and stuff that goes on in graphic design to get your end product, and obviously people have different workflows. Mine tends to be, I don't necessarily have an idea beforehand, but I work through it to create something which eventually somehow manages to look good. So here we've got our blurred out colours, and just to get a little bit of distortion, we can do is just head into filter and just hop in liquify. And what it's going to let us do is literally with a brush move and drag it about as much as we want, so we can edit the pressure. But you get an idea that we're able to do that. If we just move the pressure up a little bit, potentially the size, we can really start messing this up, just swirling it around. So we really want a lot of distortion where we can. Ignore the fact that it's messing up the blur for now. Stretch it out where you can, but it doesn't matter because it's just going to be our reference point. Make sure we're getting colours in sequence. Drag it out so you get a little bit of colours in different areas. In fact, this orange here might need more of a gradient to it. It's quite unique by itself, so we might stretch out this, move that out of the way just like that. And we can really go about making this. So make sure the colours are blended well together, sort of. I'm honest, I'm not really, don't have much going on inside my head right now. There isn't anything that I'm particularly working towards or trying to go for. If anything, I like the way these sort of colours here blend in together, and I'm sort of wary about the way this orange is very static. But we might be able to, also it looks quite sharp here, but the way this is sharp and then it has more blurred areas actually looks quite nice. So you can even go down a little bit and play with scale here. If you want to go crazy, you can literally do this, which also works. Although I might Control Z some of that if my Photoshop doesn't crash. Alright, sweet. So we've got our Control Z some of that, just so we're working with here. And then we can maybe size this up just a tiny bit. Bring in some more of this blur that we're getting down here. Some of that. Maybe we can okay that. And that's going to give us a liquefied result that we can then blur a little more and distort to our heart's content to get the final grading result that might look good. So we're just going to give this a second for the liquify to process, and then we can head over to the next step. Beautiful. So now that's processed, what we can do is we can distort this a little more. So if we head back over into filter, blur, and then Gaussian blur, we can do some of this. Although at this point, what I'm liking is the way this seems sharp here and then blurs here. So we can try something a little different. This is a technique which I'm actually quite fresh to, so if this goes wrong, I'm incredibly sorry. But if you manage to pull it off right, it looks really good. So we're just going to hide that for a sec, and we're going to start making some black and white gradients, right? Just get a brush, make sure the hardness is on 0, and start mucking about a little bit. So we're working a really high resolution here, which hence the sort of lag and stuff. But we're just going to start making some patterns, nothing too crazy. Bear in mind the ratio of black to white. That should be okay. So what we're going to do, don't judge this too much. We're going to control and then click on the thumbnail here, and that's going to select everything. In fact, scratch that, duplicate the white layer and make sure it's got a white background, because right now this is just black and white, black PNG. Do the same thing again, and control, click on the thumbnail and do Control C on your keyboard. What you're going to do is you're going to go into channels, click Control D real quick to get rid of the masking ants. Head over to channels, make a new layer here called Alpha 1, and Control V, what you just made, right? It's not going to make a lot of sense for now, but for this is adding it as a channel. It's important. It's going to make this red, but that's okay. We can toggle the view of this and put our RGB layers back on and just toggle that off, okay? So for now, that doesn't matter. That's not a visible layer in our composition. But what we do want to do is toggle this visible again. Click on this, head to Filter, Blur, and hop on Lens Blur. Now what we're going to do is going to create a varied Gaussian blur. So it's not going to apply it to the whole image, or rather lens blur, but it's going to apply it to a mask variable on where the black and white was in that channel that we just created. So we just wait for this to load up real quick. We will be able to, once this hops in, click on source, and there will be a layer here that we can select for Alpha 1, which we just created, and that will apply a calculated lens blur to this image. As you can just see, it's popping up, but hold on, my PC's being a little slow. Okay, so if that loads up for you, what you want to do is select your alpha source, and what you're going to do is make sure your radius is pretty turned up so you've got more control, and slowly incrementally turn up your blur focal distance. And what you'll see is in certain areas the blur will start to show. If you really activate the noise, you can see exactly where that blur is. So we're getting some here, 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 and here. If we zoom in just a little bit, I hope it doesn't affect our PC too much. Be careful with noise, because I tend to use it sparingly in this process and sort of add it later where I want it specifically. So for that I'm going to turn it down now, but what we can do is turn on the blur and see what we're working with. So we're getting a little bit of a sharp edge there, but that's okay. We can untick invert to see if that has any effect, which it most likely will. And then we can okay that and see what our, tell them to make sure the noise is all the way off, and we can see what our result is. We just okay. Just going to process it and apply our filters. Bear in mind the reason this is taking so long is obviously because of the pixels per inch and the resolution, but it's always better because what you can do after this is that you can imagine this is sort of a canvas which then you can zoom in on and take particular 4K or 1080p sort of screenshots from and use that for whatever you like. You can use it for the headers or whatnot, but it's very difficult to create a gradient just from one canvas, if that makes sense. You're better off zooming in and manipulating it in a certain way to create the look that you're actually after. So we're just going to wait for this to apply real quick, and should be good to move on. Beautiful stuff. So at this point I'm inclined to save it because we're working very slow and it undoubtedly will crash my PC at some point. Sweet. You can head over here and go save. Just save as gradients 2. Maximize compatibility, whatnot. And we can start manipulating this even more. So we're getting some nice sharp edges here, and we're starting to get a pretty good idea of what our gradient is going to look like. So what I'd say is at this point, what we can do is maybe try to blur it a little more. So we can head over to Gaussian blur, and you can see starting to get some pretty nice gradients here. And I say if we stop out there, what we can start to do is some real color work. So we're going to be pretty much done with the filters for now. What we can start doing is clicking on this little half circle here and hopping into curves. And this is the easiest way to manipulate color in Photoshop specifically. So we'll set up onto the red channel here. We can start moving this up, and this is where you really want to experiment to see what you can get. So we're already seeing that if we bring that up and particularly bring that down, we're getting colors that we didn't even know were there. So you're getting some purples, which we can have in or out. But if we move that down, we're getting some lighter blues there, which look quite nice. I'd be tempted to keep the purples out just for now and just get a little hint of that light blue. We can hop into green, and we can get some nice reds out of that. If we turn this up, we can start getting some oranges out of the red there and some lighter greens which you didn't know were there. You can saturate it a bit more. You're almost getting like a thermal-esque type palette here. And then we can hop into blue, which always tends to be my favourite. And we can dip in the blue, always makes it a little too greeny and saturated. But if you tighten it up a little bit, you want to bear in mind the softness here. You can see when you start to really edit the curves, you get a lot of hardness. I mean, that's not really what we're looking for. You want the gradient to flow nicely. And see, we can even do that. And even if that does flow a little bit, what we can then do is our old trusty Control G, Control J, Control E. The reason I do that is because it duplicates it, so you can go back to it almost as a reserve if things were to go wrong. And we can head into blur, causing blur it one more time, something like this. You can even play with the old invert, so you can hit Control I on your keyboard once this loads and see what that looks like. That doesn't even look bad at all. You're almost creating like a nighttime sort of gradient there. And at this point, things you can do, you can even play with the hue saturation, so we can create a hue saturation layer and sort of mess about with this however we like. If we see something that we really want to go for, we've got some sort of warmer, we can saturate it up or down. Obviously as we go up, those lines start to get a lot sharper, so it depends what you're after, but a lot of these blue gradients are starting to look quite nice. Bear in mind that we are sharpening over the Gaussian blur, so you're getting some of the distortion, but a little bit of desaturation and finding the right hue layer should fix that quite nicely. Personally, I was a fan of this sort of saturated red there, and I think if we find that, we can colorize it to our heart's content, and maybe leave it somewhat like that. Maybe turn this up very slightly. And what we can do is we can head into curves. We can go under here and play with this maybe a little bit more. We can get our greens and purples back there. start to get some purples back into the game. We can get some reds. Just getting some dark blues there. Some purples that we didn't know about. Nice, but they're just a little sharp, so I'd almost be inclined to leave the red and just hop into the green, or rather blue. See if there's anything interesting happening with these blues. But I'd almost say some of this is starting to look quite interesting. Bearing in mind a lot of this stuff here, we can liquify it even more after this. Control J, Control E. Invert it. Invert it. See what we're working with. Even that's quite nice. What we can do is then duplicate the layer, and invert, and then we can go on the eraser tool and just scale this up a little bit. Make sure the sharpness is on 0, hardness is on 0, and you can erase over it and actually start getting a mixture between the, which looks quite cool to be fair. You start getting a mixture between the inverted version and the regular version of your gradient, and that's going to create a really interesting result. So that actually looks quite cool there, and you can see if we hit I on that. Oh, cancel. If we toggle that and hit I on that, you can see it blends right back in. What we can also do is mess with some of these, the blending modes. See if any of these start to look interesting at all. These look cool, but look a little bit rainbowy for my liking. These look hard, but it's just sort of like detail on parts that wouldn't necessarily normally see. Although, having said that, exclusion is one for books. That does create a nice look. And we can, that's it to hue. Difference looks quite nice, but I don't like how saturated some of those corners are getting. Hard light looks nice, almost like a Northern Lights-esque sort of look there, which I think is quite interesting. We can mess about with this a little bit more. We can head to hue saturation and start hewing it about a little more, though we're getting pretty we're getting the psychedelic territory at this point. We can desaturate a little bit to get rid of those tones, and I'd say at this point we're ready to start making some more gradients. So if we were to say that this is our canvas and we're pretty happy with this result and we like the way it looks, what you can then do is just duplicate it, hide this, and start scaling it up a little bit. So if we zoom out, you can see our frame of what we're actually been making this whole time, this sort of strange art piece. We can start zooming into bits that we actually like. So in particular, this tone here looks really cool. So we can click enter and save that as one potentially that we can use. Wait for the transform to apply. And then we can duplicate it and move it along again and again until we've got 3 or 4 variations that we're happy with, and we can individually hue or saturate those to get something that looks even better. So getting some really nice blue tones here and some purples which look beautiful. Even getting a little more like that, almost like sort of, I'm thinking Windows sleep sort of lab mode like you used to get on the old Windows Media Player. It's looking a little psychedelic. Normally we'd stick to the palette, but you can see my point about what we started with and what we're sort of ending up with when you get to grips with software like Photoshop and shit, even Cinema 4D sometimes. A lot of it is about the process and sort of the way you go about doing things. I've always messed about with blending modes and stuff like hue and saturation because for some reason I'll tweak it as I'll go through and I'll start getting really wacky results. And the more you learn how to use the software, obviously that's down to the artist, but hopefully you guys can resonate in a way and sort of like see how you can generate results. It's not always linear, you know, it's not always start to finish, it's not always the way you think it's going to turn out, but hell, sometimes it works. So it's taking a little bit longer, but if we just use these two for the tutorial, we can move on. Beautiful. So at this point, if we're happy with that result, what we can do is one of two things. We can either, I'm hesitant to do this because of how long it's taking to process on my computer at the minute, but it may be worth doing. If we blur this a little more, maybe set to 300, we can start to get some proper nice gradients. If we up it even more, maybe 500, we're starting to get the gradients that we're after. So if we hit OK on that, you're seeing we're getting a really nice mix of colour. Just going to let this filter apply, and then once we've done this, what we can do is literally either go about adding noise or editing the hue, and then these gradients are pretty good to go. They're pretty good to use. We're working with the resolution that we want. When we export these will be super high definition files, then we can go along and work with. You can see also when we're working with a large canvas, the edge pixels sort of tend to blur out, and as we zoom in, you're getting a completely filled image here. So, you know, the more you have to work with, the more freedom you have creatively. So, it really helps. And we can hopefully, God, about a quarter of this video has been me watching this little green bar talking, but I am hoping that I'm making sense. So now that we've got that, what we can go about doing is, with both of these actually, I'll apply a little blur on this later, but what we can do with this is add a little bit of noise. So we head to filter, noise. You'll see this is quite a small, but adds a nice detailed effect to the final piece. If we zoom in a little bit, we're getting a little bit of glitching, but if we untick monochromatic here, set the amount to maybe 20, we're getting a nice little bit of grain, which almost adds a filter over our final image to make it look like it was sort of put together that way. Give the impression that it was anyway. And we can drag this aside, you can see it's incredibly subtle. I'm not even sure if you can see that on the recording, but if you make this 50 even, I'm not entirely sure if it's actually... okay, no, it is previewing, it's just taking a little while. So we want this set to about, God, maybe 20, I'd say. Wait for this to clean up, and I believe if this loads up, yeah, so you're getting a nice subtle touch in some areas. You can also have this off, but for me personally, I quite like it. You can hit OK, and you've got a nice little layer of noise over your gradient, which is going to add that sort of level of, what's the word? Trying to think of a word to say, like, bring it together. Composition, I suppose. And there we go, guys. If I just zoom out real quick, that is how I go about making gradients in Photoshop. You can use these for whatever you like, but generally this should give you a pretty good idea of how you can go from a handful of colors from a color palette, which are not related at all, or seemingly sort of related, and turn into something like this. Just shows you what the piece of kit can do. Hopefully you can take some of these methods and apply them in your own way. I'd love to see what you guys can make. Obviously it's sick for me putting content out, and I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you in the next episode. If you have any ideas, please let me know, because I'm showing you guys a load of stuff which I really enjoy doing, and like techniques and how to make certain stuff. If you guys have any ideas, I'd love to put value out there for you, so do let me know, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching.